Welcome to the world of precious Ramotswe, kind, observant, and always guided by common sense and a good cup of bush tea. Tell us where in the world you are listening from. It brings us joy to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more cases from Botswana. The morning light of Botswana has a way of announcing itself with grace rather than drama. The sun rose steadily over the acacia-dotted horizon, spilling its golden rays upon the red earth as if reminding everyone that the world, despite its troubles, was still beautiful and worth noticing. On Zebra Drive, where the small white house of Mama Precious Ramotswe stood in quiet dignity, the day began as it always did, with the smell of red bush tea rising gently from a freshly poured cup. Emma Ramotswe sat on her veranda, the wooden chair creaking ever so slightly beneath her. She held the cup in both hands, not out of fear of spilling it. She was far too careful for that, but because she liked to feel the warmth of the tea seeping into her palms. Tea was not only for drinking, tea was for remembering. And as she watched the morning spread across the land, she thought once again of her late father, Obed Ramotswe, that fine man of cattle whose wisdom had shaped her as surely as the Botswana earth shaped the roots of the acacia. Her father had always said that life was like cattle. Sometimes they strayed, sometimes they were stubborn, but if you guided them with patience and kindness, they would find the right path in the end. That lesson had never failed her, neither in life nor in her work at the #1 Ladies Detective Agency. She smiled at the thought. There were many in Gaborone who thought detective work meant chasing thieves or solving dark mysteries. But for her, it was mostly listening. People needed to be heard, and in the hearing of their stories, one could often find the truth. The garden gate clicked as it shifted in the breeze, and she turned her head slightly to listen. Beyond the gate came the soft clinking of cowbells carried on the air from a nearby herd. Botswana was full of such sounds, gentle, reassuring noises that reminded one that life went on as it should. A passing truck in the distance kicked up dust, and soon all would be busy again. Already she could imagine the apprentices at Clockweng Road Speedy Motors quarrelling over spanners or accusing one another of misplacing a part that had not been touched in weeks. They were young boys, full of excuses and clumsy energy, but Ramotswe bore them no ill will. They were learning, as all boys must learn, and under the steady eye of Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, they would one day be better men. She sipped her tea again and thought of the balance of things, the simple and the complicated, the honest and the false. This was Botswana's way, to look for truth in the ordinary, to trust the land and its wisdom. That morning, as the sun moved higher and the air warmed, she felt the peace of that truth. But peace, she knew, never lasted long for a detective. There was always a knock on the door, always a story carried in from the world outside. Her eyes lingered on the quiet street, where the dust still lay untouched by the bustle of the day. Somewhere in that silence was the faintest stirring of what was to come. For appearances, however convincing, were not always what they seemed. She remembered her father again, warning her never to judge a cow by its shine alone. The glossiest hide might cover the weakest beast. In the days ahead, she would see this lesson proven in human form. Someone would soon arrive with a story too polished, a need too rehearsed, and beneath it all, a truth waiting to be uncovered. For now, though, Emma Ramotswe allowed herself another slow sip of bush tea. There would be time enough for cases and complications. The morning belonged to the land, to memory, and to the comfort of knowing that Botswana was still as it should be, wise, enduring, and filled with the small sounds of life waking up. The number one ladies' detective agency, situated just off the main road into town, was not the grandest of offices in Gaborone, but it carried with it the quiet dignity of a place where people could come and unburden themselves. The building itself had once been a small post office, now converted into 2 modest rooms, a front space with a desk and 2 red chairs for clients, and a back room where filing cabinets, tea tins, and the detective's own quiet reflections found their proper place. The sign outside, painted with pride by one of the apprentices from Clockwing Road Speedy Motors, announced the agency's name in bold lettering, with the simple phrase beneath it, "For all problems, large and small." It was a promise that Mama Ramotswe took seriously, for she believed that even the smallest problem, if left unresolved, could weigh heavily upon the heart. That morning, Mama Grace Makutsi arrived early, as was her habit. She had walked from her home, her shoes clicking firmly against the dusty road. The shoes, fashionable though slightly pinching, were new, and she held herself with the air of one whose footwear carried authority. Shoes, she often reminded herself, told people who you were. And she, with her 97% from the Botswana Secretarial College, was not to be mistaken for an ordinary secretary. She was an assistant detective now, co-director in many respects, though Emma Ramotswe seldom used that exact title. Still, the truth of it remained. Inside the office, Emma Ramotswe sat at her desk with her second cup of bush tea steaming gently before her. She had already been reflecting on her father and the quiet wisdom of Botswana's cattle people. But when Emma Makutsi entered, her thoughts shifted to the day ahead. "Good morning, Emma," said Emma Makutsi, adjusting her glasses and giving the room a quick inspection to ensure everything was in its place. "Good morning, Emma Makutsi," replied Emma Ramotswe warmly. "The day is already warming. Soon we will be in need of shade." Mama Makutsi sniffed lightly. "Shade, yes, but also fans. It is already September, and these offices get very hot. Perhaps we should think about getting an electric fan. Other offices have them." "Fans cost money," said Mama Ramotswe gently. "And money is something that disappears faster than rain in the Kalahari. Let us not spend it too quickly." Before Mama Makutsi could argue further, there was the sound of cautious footsteps outside, followed by a light knock on the door. Both women turned their heads in unison. The day's first client had arrived. "Please come in," called Mama Ramotswe, setting aside her tea. The door opened slowly, and a young woman stepped into the room. She was slender, with carefully combed hair and a dress that, though simple, looked as though it had been chosen with care. Her eyes darted around the office, taking in the red chairs, the desk, and the kind but steady gaze of the woman behind it. "Good morning," she said softly, almost timidly. "This is the detective agency, isn't it?" "Yes," replied Mama Ramotswe. "You have come to the right place. Please sit down, Emama, and tell us what it is that troubles you." The girl settled into one of the red chairs. For a moment she clasped her hands tightly in her lap, as if rehearsing her words. Then she looked up, her eyes large and glistening. "My name is Naledi," she began. "I am a student, and I have lost someone very dear to me. My aunt. She has gone missing, and I do not know where to look. She is all the family I have, and I am so worried that something terrible has happened." There was a silence as her words hung in the air. Emma Ramotswe tilted her head slightly, observing her with the care of a woman who had heard many stories in this very room. Her eyes were kind, but behind them lay a sharpness honed by years of listening. "I see," she said at last. "Your aunt is missing. That must be very hard for you, Ma. Can you tell me when you last saw her?" Naledi hesitated. "It has been some weeks now. She lives in a small village far from here, and I came to the city to study. When I wrote to her, there was no reply. Then I asked someone I know in the village, and they told me she had not been seen for a long time. I am afraid she may be gone." Her voice trembled on the last word, and she lowered her eyes. "People do not simply vanish," said Mama Ramotswe gently. "Sometimes they move, sometimes they hide, but always there is a reason. We must try to find it." "Yes," said Naledi quickly, relief flickering across her face. "That is why I have come to you. I have heard that you help people, that you find the truth when others cannot." Emma Ramotswe inclined her head, acknowledging the compliment, though she felt the faintest stirring of unease. The girl's words were carefully chosen, as if they had been practiced. And there was something else, an odd brightness in her eyes, not entirely consistent with grief. "What is the name of this aunt?" asked Emma Makutsi sharply, adjusting her glasses. "Where does she live? We will need proper details if we are to investigate." Naledi gave a small, nervous laugh. "Her name is Emma Mfo. She lives near Lobatse, in a village called Mogonono. I do not know the exact house number. Things are not so formal there, but everyone knows her." Emma Makutsi pursed her lips. "Everybody? That will be useful then." She glanced at Emma Ramotswe, who remained silent, considering. "Tell me, Naledi," said Emma Ramotswe after a pause. "What is your aunt like? Is she old, young, married, unmarried? We must know these things." "She is middle-aged," said Naledi, after a slight hesitation. "She never married, but she has always taken care of me. She is kind, very kind, but also poor. That is why I came to study in Gaborone, to make a better life for both of us." Her words were convincing, yet too polished, like a story recited from a page. Emma Ramotswe knew the signs. Still, she smiled, offering comfort rather than suspicion. "You have done well to come here," she said. "We will make inquiries, but first you must not lose hope. Botswana is a wide country, but it is not so wide that people can disappear forever." Naledi's eyes brightened, and she clasped her hands in gratitude. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you both. I knew you would understand." When she had gone, the two detectives sat in silence for a moment, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps. "What do you think, Mama?" asked Mama Makutsi at last, lowering her voice. "Do you believe her?" Mama Ramotswe leaned back in her chair, folding her hands over her stomach. "I believe she is troubled," she said slowly. "But whether the trouble is, as she says, that I am not yet sure. There was something in her eyes, something that did not quite match her words." "Yes," said Mama Kutsi firmly. "I noticed too. She did not even give us her surname. And Mogonono is a very small place. If her aunt is known by everyone, then we shall find out quickly enough." "Indeed," said Maramotswe, "but we must tread carefully. Sometimes people tell stories not to deceive, but because they are afraid to tell the truth." She glanced at the desk where Naledi had sat, the red chair still bearing the impression of her presence. It was always this way. A story entered the office, clothed in words, and behind it hid a deeper truth. It was the task of the detective, not to pounce on the words, but to listen for the silence between them. Outside, the day was fully awake now. The sound of traffic drifted in from the road, mingled with the distant laughter of children playing. Gaborone bustled, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding behind office doors. Yet, within this modest building, another story had begun, one that would test not only the skills of Botswana's First Lady detective, but her patience, her kindness, and her belief that truth, however hidden, could be found. The following day dawned as many days did in Botswana, with the red earth still cool beneath the first steps of morning, and the wide sky above hinting at the heat that was to come. Emma Precious Ramotswe had risen early, as she always did, for she believed that the morning hours held a special clarity of mind. She had taken her tea on the veranda, thinking again about the girl who had called herself Naledi, and about the curious air with which she had spoken of her missing aunt. The story had sounded polished, too polished, like a dress freshly ironed for a special occasion. A true grief, she reflected, usually tumbled out in fragments, not neat sentences. By the time she reached the office, Mama Grace Makutsi was already there, sorting through files with her usual briskness. Her glasses glinted in the morning light that streamed through the window, and her shoes made small, decisive taps on the floor as she moved between desk and cabinet. "We must begin at once, Ma," she declared. "This story of the aunt does not sit well with me. Mogonono is a very small place. If there is an aunt named Ima Mfo, then we shall hear of her quickly." "Yes," said Emma Ramotswe, lowering herself into her chair. "But let us remember, sometimes people are not missing at all. Sometimes they are only hiding. We must listen carefully before we decide what is true." That day, they agreed to make their first inquiries. Gaborone was a city where one could learn much from listening. Shopkeepers, bus drivers, the women at the market, all carried small pieces of information that, when joined, made a pattern. It was Botswana's way. Gossip moved more swiftly than water, and in that flow of words, one could find a hidden truth. Their first stop was a small general store on the edge of the market, a place where women came to buy flour and sugar and to exchange news while they waited for change. The shopkeeper, a man with a neat moustache and a reputation for remembering everyone's business, greeted them with enthusiasm. "Ah, Ma Ramotswe, it is good to see you. And you too, Mama Makutsi. Always a pleasure. What can I do for you today?" "We are looking for somebody," said Emma Ramotswe gently. "A woman called Emma Mfo, said to be from Mogonono. Perhaps you have heard of her." The shopkeeper frowned, scratching his chin. "Mogonono, you say? That is a very small place. I know many people there, but this name, it does not come to me. Perhaps she is known by another name. People in villages often have more than one." "That is true," said Emma Ramotswe. "Thank you, Ra. We will ask elsewhere." As they left the store, Emma Makutsi pursed her lips. "You see, already the story begins to fall apart. If this woman were well known, he would have remembered her. Shopkeepers always know everybody." "Perhaps," said Mama Ramotswe, "but we must not be too quick. Sometimes the truth hides itself for a while." Next, they stopped by a woman selling vegetables under a wide umbrella. She was elderly, her hands rough from years of pulling crops from the soil. She greeted them warmly, for she knew Emma Ramotswe's late father, Obed, in the days when cattle passed through that very market. "We are looking for a woman," said Emma Ramotswe, repeating her question. The old woman shook her head. "There are many women in Mogonono, but this one I do not know. Emma Mfo, you say? No, there is no such person there. I would have heard." That was the second silence, the second absence where there should have been a presence. Later, they visited a small cafe where drivers gathered between trips. A young man, overhearing their conversation, leaned across. "I have driven that way many times," he said. "There is no woman of that name in Mogonono. Perhaps she comes from somewhere else." By the time they returned to the office, the day was hot, and Emma Makutsi removed her shoes to rest her feet, sighing with the relief of it. "You see, Emma," she said, "already we have asked 3 people, and none of them know her. This Naledi is lying. I said so from the beginning." Emma Ramotswe poured tea from the pot she had left on the desk. She took her time before answering, letting the calm settle. "Perhaps she is lying," she said, "but we must ask ourselves why. People do not tell lies for no reason. A lie is like a path in the bush. It goes somewhere. We must follow it until we see where it leads." That afternoon, they visited a small house on the outskirts of town, where an elderly woman kept goats. She welcomed them kindly, offering milk in chipped enamel cups. "We are looking for a woman," said Mama Ramotswe once again. The woman shook her head. "I know Mogonono well. I was born there. But no, this woman does not exist. There is no Mumfo there." When they left, Emma Makutsi's face was triumphant. "That is the 4th person to say the same thing. What more proof do we need?" "Proof," said Ramotswe softly, "is a heavy word, Emma Makutsi. What we have now are shadows. Proof comes later." They walked slowly back toward the office. The sun was low, and the sky had begun to change from blue to the warm gold of late afternoon. Around them, the city moved with its usual rhythm. Cars honking, children running, women carrying baskets on their heads with grace. It was a good place, thought Emma Ramotswe, full of small stories, each one important to the teller. At the office, she sat down heavily, her thoughts still on the girl. Something about her had not fitted together. Her clothes, her manner, her rehearsed sadness. She had looked less like a girl in distress and more like one playing a part. Later, as she watered the small plants outside her house, she thought of her father again. Obed Ramotswe had often said that cattle could be recognized not by what they showed, but by what they hid. A cow might look healthy, but the wise farmer watched the way it stood, the way it moved, the small signs that told the truth. So it was with people too. Naledi had tried to look helpless, but there had been something in her eyes, an alertness, a calculation that did not belong with helplessness. That night, Mama Ramotswe prepared her simple supper, set out a place at the table, and ate slowly, thinking. She thought of the girl's story, of the aunt who did not exist, and of the village where no one had heard the name. Lies, she reflected, were like fabric. Fine at first, but when stretched too thin, the weave began to show. The case had only just begun, and already she felt its threads pulling in unexpected directions. Tomorrow they would follow them further, for that was the work of a detective, to walk slowly, to listen carefully, and to trust that the truth, however shy, would eventually reveal itself. At the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency, cases often wove themselves together with the threads of ordinary life. A case might seem serious, missing aunts, mysterious girls, strange stories, but still the rhythms of everyday Botswana had their way of pressing in. It was in those rhythms that lessons were learned, sometimes more valuable than the case itself. The morning after their first round of inquiries, Emma Grace Makutsi arrived at the office looking particularly pleased with herself. Her new shoes, shiny and a little stiff, carried her across the dusty street with the authority of a judge entering court. She paused in the doorway, adjusting her spectacles so that they glinted just so in the sunlight. "Emma," she said, settling into her chair with a certain grandeur, "I must tell you that these shoes are very fine shoes. They are comfortable, they are stylish, and they make people look at me with respect. A person is taken more seriously when they are properly shod." Emma Precious Ramotswe, who was already at her desk with her first cup of bush tea, smiled indulgently. "Shoes are good things, Emma Makutsi. They protect our feet from stones and thorns, but I think respect comes more from what is inside a person's head and heart." "Inside, yes," said Emma Makutsi quickly, "but also outside. If you arrive at a place in worn-out shoes, people think you are careless. They do not know you have 97%. They see only the shoes." She looked down at the pair, which gleamed even in the subdued light of the office. They had cost her more than she had intended to spend, but she had convinced herself that the expense was justified. After all, how could an assistant detective be taken seriously if she wore the same old sandals that every secretary wore? The shoes themselves, if one had been inclined to listen, seemed to carry an opinion. They whispered to her, in the quiet way that shoes sometimes did, "You are somebody important now. You must walk firmly. People will notice." Across town, in the yard of Clockweng Road Speedy Motors, there was far less firmness and far more fumbling. The apprentices, two boys whose hearts were not yet settled into the business of spanners and carburettors, were arguing about which part belonged to which car. A rusty exhaust pipe leaned against the wall, and a half-disassembled engine lay forgotten in the dust. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, that kindest of mechanics and husband to Emma Ramotswe, stood by with a look of weary patience. "Rah! How many times have I told you," he said to one of the boys, "that you cannot put back a bolt if you have already lost the nut? These things belong together, like man and wife. You cannot keep one and forget the other." The boy hung his head, muttering something about the other apprentice taking the nut. The other, of course, denied it hotly, and soon the two were squabbling like hens over a grain of maize. Mr. Matakoni sighed. His apprentices were good boys at heart, but their thoughts were often far away, on football matches, on girls, on anything but the serious dignity of a well-tuned engine. Still, he did not scold too harshly. He remembered being young himself, when the world was wide and temptations many. Patience, he believed, was the best teacher. It was at that very moment that Mama Potokwane, the formidable matron of the orphan farm, appeared at the gate. She carried a tin in her hands, and the smell of fruit cake wafted ahead of her like a messenger. Fruit cake was her weapon and her charm. With it, she had persuaded many men in Gaborone to part with their money, their time, or their labour, all for the good of the children. "Ra Matakoni," she called cheerfully. "I was passing this way, and I thought you might enjoy a small slice of cake. It is very fresh, baked this morning. I also thought you might help me with something at the orphan farm, something very small, hardly worth mentioning." Mr. Matakoni smiled, knowing that nothing asked by Emma Potokwane was ever small. Still, who could resist fruit cake? Certainly not he. Later that afternoon, when Emma Ramotswe visited the garage, she found the apprentices still squabbling, Emma Potokwane discussing brakes for the orphan farm's minibus, and Mr. Matakoni looking resigned but not unhappy. "It is always the same, Emma," he said to his wife with a small shrug. "There is always a job waiting, and with Emma Potokwane, there is always cake." "That is true," said Emma Ramotswe with a laugh. "Cake is a very powerful thing." Meanwhile, back at the office, Emma Makutsi had written a neat report of their inquiries so far. She read it aloud, emphasizing her own sharp observations. We have spoken to 4 people, and all deny knowledge of the aunt. Therefore, the conclusion is that Naledi is lying. Case closed. Not closed, corrected Mama Ramotswe gently. We must not close the book too quickly. There is still much we do not know. Mama Makutsi frowned. But surely, Emma, when everybody says the same thing, that is proof. Not proof, said Emma Ramotswe. Evidence, yes, but proof must be stronger. We must look again. And besides, we must understand why she is lying, if she is. The why is always as important as the what. The shoes, listening beneath the desk, seemed to protest. Why indeed, they whispered to her. Why not simply accept what is obvious? The girl is a liar. We have done our work. Now we can rest. But Ramotswe, wise to the ways of both people and shoes, simply poured another cup of tea. Cases, like cattle, had to be guided slowly, never rushed. That evening, as the sun set in shades of pink and gold, the different strands of the day wove together, the apprentices with their missing nut, Mama Potokwane with her cake and her orphans, Mama Makutsi with her proud shoes, and the girl called Naledi with her polished story. Each thread mattered, each played its part, and beneath it all lay the same truth. Appearances could be deceiving, shoes could shine and yet pinch, apprentices could appear lazy but slowly learn. Fruitcake could look like a gift but carry a request, and a girl could tell a story with bright eyes and trembling hands while hiding the truth behind them. In Botswana, thought Ramotswe, one must always look twice, once at what is shown and once at what is hidden. That was the real work of a detective. The next morning at the No. 1 Ladies' Detective Agency began as so many mornings did, with the arrival of clients, the rustle of papers, and the gentle aroma of bush tea drifting across the desk. Yet, on this morning, the air seemed to carry something sharper, something unsettled. The case of the girl who called herself Naledi was not going away. When she returned to the office 2 days after her first visit, she wore the same carefully chosen dress. Her hair was neatly tied back, and in her hand she carried a small handbag, the sort of bag that seemed more suited to the daughter of a well-off family than a struggling student. She smiled, but her eyes flickered as she sat once again in the red chair before Emma Ramotswe's desk. "You have found something?" she asked quickly, as if anxious to guide the conversation before it began. Emma Ramotswe regarded her with her usual calm. "We have spoken to people, yes. They tell us that they do not know your aunt in Mogonono. They say there is no woman of that name." For a moment, the girl's composure faltered. She clasped her hands together tightly, then released them again, her fingers twisting as if to wring out the lie. "They must not remember her," she said hastily. "Perhaps she goes by another name. People in villages often do. Or perhaps she has moved. Yes, that must be it." Before Emma Ramotswe could respond, Emma Grace Makutsi leaned forward, her glasses flashing in the light. "Moved where? People do not simply move away without anyone knowing. Villages are not like cities, where neighbours ignore one another. In villages, everyone knows everyone's business. If your aunt had moved, they would have told us." The girl opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, her voice carried a note of irritation. "You do not believe me." "It is not about belief," said Mama Ramotswe gently. "It is about listening to all sides of a story. If your aunt has moved, we must know where. If she has changed her name, we must know why. These things are important." The girl's eyes dropped. Her voice, when it came again, was softer, rehearsed. "I am only afraid she is gone. I do not want to think of it." There was silence in the room. Outside, the faint buzz of cicadas filled the air, punctuated by the sound of a distant lorry groaning down the road. The world carried on, but in that small office, truth and falsehood danced around one another like wary animals. When Naledi finally left, the two detectives sat back, the red chair still warm from her presence. "She grows uneasy," said Emma Makutsi firmly. "Her story frays at the edges. She says one thing, then another. If she is not lying, then I am the Queen of England." "Do not be too hard, Mama Makutsi," replied Emama Ramotswe. "A lie is sometimes told out of fear, not malice. We must find out what she fears." That afternoon, they paid a visit to the registry office, a place where names were recorded with careful handwriting in large leather-bound books. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose, searched patiently through the volumes. "There is no record of a Mumfo from Mogonono," he said at last, closing the book with a soft thump. "Not in the last 10 years. "Nothing at all?" asked Ramotswe. "Nothing," said the clerk. "It is possible she is listed under another village, but here, no." As they walked back to the office, Makutsi was triumphant. "You see, even the government does not know her. She does not exist. This Naledi has woven a whole story from thin air." "Perhaps," said Emma Ramotswe, "but perhaps the name is not the truth. Perhaps there is another name beneath it. We must be patient." Later that week, they invited Naledi back for another meeting. She came reluctantly, as if fearing what might be asked of her. This time, her answers were slower, her voice more defensive. When pressed by Emma Makutsi about dates, she stumbled. When asked about letters, she claimed they had been lost. The tangle of her lies grew knotted, each new thread failing to match the one before. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, who had been invited to sit in quietly, observed the girl with his gentle mechanic's eye. "She looks nervous," he said afterwards, "not like someone in grief, more like someone afraid of being found out. At the garage, when the apprentices have broken something, they look just the same." The apprentices themselves, when told of the case, offered their own opinions, full of youthful confidence. "She is lying, rah-rah," one declared. "When a person avoids looking into your eyes, they are lying." "Not always," said the other. "Sometimes people are shy." But even in their jest, there was a grain of truth. Naledi's eyes shifted too much, darting away from questions, settling on the floor, the wall, anywhere but the steady gaze of Ma Ramotswe. At the end of that week, as the heat of the afternoon settled over Gaborone like a heavy blanket, Mama Ramotswe sat once again on her veranda. She thought of Obed, her father, and his words about cattle. "You can tell a sick cow," he had said, "not by its coat, but by the way it holds itself. Watch carefully, and you will see the truth." So it was with Naledi. Her coat, the story she wore, was bright and polished, but the way she held herself, the way she stumbled and shifted, spoke of weakness beneath. Cases were like rivers. At first they seemed clear, then muddied, then clear again. Already this case was turning, the current pulling them towards some hidden pool where the truth lay waiting. She felt no anger at the girl, only curiosity and perhaps a little pity. Whatever this deception was, it carried in it the scent not of malice, but of desperation. Soon, she thought, the truth would show itself, as it always did. Lies could be woven tightly, but the weave never lasted. Sooner or later, the threads pulled apart, and the pattern beneath was revealed. There were days when the work of a detective seemed like chasing dust devils across the Kalahari, always swirling, never quite caught. The story of the girl called Naledi had tangled itself into lies and evasions, leaving behind not clarity, but a cloud of uncertainty. After such days, Emma Precious Ramotswe had her way of restoring balance. She would sit in the shade of the acacia tree behind her house, a cup of bush tea in hand, and let the wide Botswana sky do its work upon her thoughts. That afternoon was no different. The sun hung high, turning the red earth into a sheet of heat. The air shimmered above the road, and even the goats in the field across the way sought shelter beneath thorn trees. Emma Ramotswe settled into her chair, her dress rustling as she sat, and listened to the quiet sounds around her. The drone of insects, the faint tinkle of a cowbell in the distance, the occasional bark of a dog too lazy to pursue its quarry. She thought, as she so often did, of her father, Obed Ramotswe. A good man, a man of cattle, a man whose wisdom had been delivered not in speeches, but in small remarks made at the end of long days. He had taught her to read the language of the earth, the way clouds gathered over the hills, the way cattle shifted in the kraal, the way a man's eyes revealed more than his words ever could. Cattle do not lie, Obed had once told her. They show you their health if you know where to look. A man, however, can lie, but his eyes, those will betray him. Naledi's eyes returned to her mind now. They were bright, quick, too quick. They skittered like lizards across the surface of things, never settling. That was not the gaze of grief. That was the gaze of someone weaving a story, hoping the listener would be caught in its threads. Yet, Mama Ramotswe reminded herself, lies were not always cruel. Sometimes they were the shelter a person built for themselves when the truth felt too heavy. She had seen it before. Women who lied about husbands who had abandoned them, men who lied about jobs they had lost, children who lied about mischief too dangerous to admit. Lies, in these cases, were not daggers but blankets. They covered shame, or fear, or longing. To tear them away too quickly was unkind. She took another sip of her tea, letting its earthy taste settle her. It was not for detectives to scold. It was for them to understand. A detective must have the patience of the cattle farmer, who knows that the herd will wander, but always returns by evening. In the coolness of her shade, she thought of Botswana itself. This was a land that had known both hardship and peace, a land that stretched out under a sky so wide it humbled a person into truth. People here carried their stories carefully, sometimes like treasures, sometimes like burdens. But always, those stories were rooted in the values of the land: honesty, kindness, and the belief that people belonged to one another. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Mama Grace Makutsi, who had come straight from the office, her shoes clicking indignantly along the path. She carried a notebook in one hand and looked full of determination. "I have written down everything," she announced as she sat. "Every inconsistency, every contradiction. I have made a list. And when you see a list, Mama, you see the truth." She opened the notebook and began to read. First, she says the aunt lives in Mogonono. Nobody there knows her. Second, she says letters were exchanged, but she has none to show us. Third, she avoids eye contact when asked about dates. And fourth, very important, her handbag is far too expensive for a poor student. Emma Ramotswe chuckled softly. You are very thorough, Ma Makutsi. Perhaps you should have been a lawyer. I would have been a very good lawyer, said Mema Makutsi, pushing her glasses higher. But instead, I am a detective, and detectives must see through lies. Yes, agreed Emma Ramotswe, but we must also see the heart behind the lie. That is even more important. Sometimes the heart is not wicked, only frightened. Emma Makutsi considered this. Frightened of what? That, said Emma Ramotswe, is what we must find out. The two women sat in silence for a while, listening to the afternoon sounds. The apprentices could be heard faintly in the distance, arguing once again about a missing spanner. From the kitchen drifted the smell of onions frying, preparing the evening meal for Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni and the children. Life carried on, ordinary and grounding, even as mysteries unfolded. You know, Mama, said Mama Ramotswe after a long pause, our country is full of stories. Some are told honestly, some are wrapped in lies. But always they are stories of people trying to find their place. Perhaps this girl is not who she says she is. Perhaps she is pretending. But why pretend? That is the question. She pretends for money, said Mama Kutsi firmly. That is what many people want. Not always, said Maramotswe. Sometimes they pretend because they wish to be seen differently. A girl may pretend to be richer or poorer or braver than she is. All of us, in some way, wear a mask. Even you, Emma Makutsi, with your shoes. They are a mask too, are they not? Emma Makutsi looked down at her shoes, which gleamed in the fading light. She hesitated. Shoes are not a mask. They are a statement. Exactly, said Mama Ramotswe. A statement. They tell the world something about you, something you want it to believe. But the real you is more than the shoes. The point lingered in the air, and Emma Makutsi said nothing more. But later, as she walked home, she found herself glancing at her shoes with a new thought. Perhaps they did speak more loudly than her own voice. That night, under the star-strewn Botswana sky, Emma Ramotswe wrote a few notes of her own. She wrote not lists of contradictions, but reflections. The girl is hiding something. She is not wicked, but afraid. The fear may be of family, of shame, or of being seen for who she truly is. We must be kind. We must wait. The truth will come. And as she laid her pen aside, she thought again of her father's cattle, resting in the kraal under the same stars. They were safe because they belonged to one another, because no matter how far they roamed, they returned home. So it was with people too, she believed, even those who lied, even those who wore masks. They longed for belonging, for a place to come home. Botswana, wide and patient, would not hurry the truth, and neither would she. The following week began with a restless air. September in Gaborone often brought such days. Days when the sky seemed too wide, when the wind carried whispers of rain that never quite came, and when people walked a little faster, as if eager to be indoors before a storm that never arrived. At the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency, that same restless air seemed to move between the desks, rustling the papers and even rattling the red chairs that stood ready for visitors. It was in such a mood that Mama Ramotswe decided it was time to bring matters to a head. Lies, she knew, could wander on indefinitely, winding themselves around the truth until nobody knew which thread to follow. But a wise detective, like a wise cattle herder, knew when to close the kraal and bring the wandering herd back into line. She sent a note to Naledi, asking her to return to the office for one more meeting. The note was written in Ma Ramotswe's calm, careful handwriting, with no suggestion of accusation, only an invitation to speak. She had learned long ago that people revealed more when they were not pressed too hard. A lie, after all, was like a thorn caught in a skirt. Pull too quickly, and you tear the fabric. Pull gently, and it slips free. On the appointed day, Naledi arrived late, her step hesitant, her eyes more guarded than before. She took her place in the red chair with a sigh that was intended to sound weary, though it carried more performance than truth. "I have been worried," she began quickly, before anyone could speak. "Worried that you will tell me there is nothing to be done. Worried that my aunt will never be found." Emma Ramotswe folded her hands over her stomach and regarded the girl with her usual quiet patience. Beside her, Emma Grace Makutsi opened her notebook, spectacles gleaming with the anticipation of someone ready to strike. "Before we tell you anything," said Mama Ramotswe softly, "we must ask again. This aunt of yours, this Mama Mfo, are you certain that is her name?" Naledi's hands tightened in her lap. "Of course. Why do you keep asking? I told you." "We have asked many people," interrupted Mama Makutsi crisply. "We have asked shopkeepers, drivers, even people who were born in Mogonono. None of them know her. Not one." The girl's face flushed. "Then they are lying," she said quickly. "They do not want to help me." "No," said Mama Ramotswe gently, her voice calm but firm. "They are not lying. They are simply telling what they know. And what they know is that there is no such woman there. So perhaps it is time you tell us who you really are." The room fell into silence. Outside, the sound of a lorry downshifting on the road echoed faintly, the rattle of its cargo breaking the stillness. Naledi's eyes darted to the window, to the desk, anywhere but to the women across from her. At last, her shoulders sagged. "My name is not Naledi," she admitted in a whisper, "and I do not have an aunt called Mima Mfo." Mama Makutsi sat up straight, her pen poised like a spear. "Then who are you?" The girl hesitated, then looked up, her eyes no longer rehearsed but naked, almost defiant. "I am the daughter of a wealthy man in Gaborone. My real name is Thato. I am not poor. I am not a student in need. I made it all up." There was another silence, heavier than the first. It hung between them, thick with the weight of deception finally unveiled. "Why?" asked Mama Ramotswe at last, her voice softer than expected. "Why would you tell such a story?" The girl's eyes filled with something that looked almost like tears, though not of grief. "Because I wanted to be someone else. I am tired of being who I am, the daughter of a man who controls everything, who decides what I wear, who I see, what I must study. People look at me and see only his money. They do not see me. So I thought, if I pretended, if I came here as someone poor, someone struggling, perhaps I would be treated differently. Perhaps someone would care for me because of me, not because of what I have." Her words fell into the room, not rehearsed now, but raw. Even Mama Makutsi, who prided herself on her sharpness, lowered her pen and said nothing for a moment. "You thought we would help you," said Emma Ramotswe gently. "Yes," whispered the girl. "I thought maybe you would see me as a person, not as somebody's spoiled child." There was a long pause. The truth, when it came, was not what Emma Ramotswe had expected. yet it carried its own weight, a sadness of a different kind. This was not a girl seeking money or plotting mischief. This was a girl seeking identity, seeking freedom, even if it meant weaving a web of lies. "You should have trusted us," said Ramotswe softly. "We would have helped you without lies. We always try to help." "I did not know that," said Thato, her voice trembling. "I only knew that people always look at me for what I have, not for who I am." Beside her, Emma Makutsi sniffed. "That may be true, but lying is still lying, and lies only make matters worse." "Yes," agreed Emma Ramotswe. "Lies always make matters worse, but now the lie is gone, and we can see more clearly." She leaned forward, her eyes kind but steady. "You are not lost, Thato. You are not poor, but you are unhappy. That is what you have come to us with, not a missing aunt, but a missing sense of who you are." The girl blinked, startled, as if someone had reached into her chest and named the emptiness she had carried. At that moment, the office door opened, and Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni stepped in quietly. He had been asked to come, for his calm presence often helped in delicate matters. He stood to one side, listening as the truth unfolded, his hands folded in front of him like a patient shepherd. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and kind. "I know what it is like to feel unseen," he said, "but the answer is never to run from yourself. It is to find those who will see you truly. And those people exist, Thato. They do." The girl's eyes glistened. "But where? Who will see me for myself?" "Start with your family," said Mama Ramotswe gently. "Even if they are difficult, they must know the truth of how you feel. And if they do not listen, then you must build a life with honesty, not with stories. Honesty will always draw the right people to you." There was a stillness then, as if even the air in the office had leaned in to listen. Thato lowered her gaze, her lips pressing together in thought. For the first time, she seemed less like an actress and more like a young woman at the crossroads of her life. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should not have lied to you. I only wanted—" She trailed off. "We understand," said Mama Ramotswe, "but from here no more lies, only the truth, even if it is hard." Thato nodded slowly. For the first time since she had entered the agency, she looked relieved. The weight of her deception, carried so carefully, had finally been set down. Outside, the restless air of the day shifted. The wind stilled, and a calmness seemed to settle over Zebra Drive. The revelation had come, not with anger, not with punishment, but with compassion. And compassion, Emma Ramotswe knew, was the strongest tool of any detective. The truth, once spoken, lingered in the air of the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency like the scent of rain after a storm. It softened the edges of things, cleared away the dust, and left behind a kind of quiet relief. For Thato, no longer Naledi, no longer the poor student with a missing aunt, the relief was palpable. She sat in the red chair with her hands loose in her lap, no longer clasped tightly together, no longer twisting themselves into knots. It was Mama Ramotswe who broke the silence. Now that the truth is known, we must decide what to do next. This is not only your matter, Thato, but your family's as well. They must hear what is in your heart. Thato looked up, alarm flashing in her eyes. "No, Mama, please. They will be angry. My father especially. He will not understand." "Perhaps," said Mama Ramotswe calmly, but perhaps he will, and even if he does not, he must hear. Families are like cattle, Thato. They may wander, they may kick and refuse to be led, but they still belong together. You cannot mend what is broken if you keep it hidden. Emma Grace Makutsi sniffed and tapped her notebook with her pen. I agree. Lying was bad enough, but to continue lying would be even worse. The truth must be faced. Thato dropped her gaze again, but she did not argue. She knew they were right, even if the thought filled her with dread. Arrangements were made quietly. A meeting was to take place in the office, for it was neutral ground. Neither the family's grand house, which carried too much weight of status, nor Thato's small world of pretense, which was now discarded. Emma Ramotswe sent a discreet word to Thato's parents, carefully explaining that there had been a misunderstanding which needed kindness and patience to resolve. When the day arrived, the office was swept clean, the chairs dusted, and a pot of tea prepared. Emma Potokwane arrived uninvited, but entirely welcome, bearing a large tin of fruitcake. These matters always go better with something sweet, she declared, setting the tin firmly on the desk. People speak more kindly with cake in their mouths. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni came too, quiet and steady, his presence like the shade of a tree on a hot day. The apprentices had been sternly warned to stay at the garage and not meddle, though one could imagine them peering through windows if they dared. At last, Thato's parents arrived. Her father, a tall man with a proud bearing, carried with him the air of someone used to being obeyed. Her mother, quieter but no less formidable, followed at his side. They sat stiffly in the red chairs, their eyes sweeping over the modest office, lingering on the hand-painted sign outside the window. "Why have we been called here?" asked the father, his tone formal. "We were told there is some misunderstanding about our daughter." Emma Ramotswe folded her hands and spoke with her usual calm. "Yes, Rara, there has been a misunderstanding. Thato has come to us with a story. It was not a true story, but beneath it lies the truth of her heart, which she has struggled to share with you." Thato shifted uncomfortably, her eyes fixed on her lap. Emma Ramotswe gave her a small nod, encouraging her to speak. At first, her voice was faint. "I lied," she admitted. "I told them I was someone else, because I wanted to escape the life you have chosen for me. I am tired of being seen as only your daughter, as only a person with money, but no voice. I wanted to know what it felt like to be myself." Her father's brows knitted together. "You lied? To strangers? You disgraced us with stories." "Not disgrace," interrupted Maramotswe firmly, but gently. "She did not come here to harm anyone. She came here because she is unhappy. She feels unseen. That is a truth that deserves to be heard." There was a pause, heavy with the weight of pride and expectation. It was then that Mama Potokwane seized her moment. She lifted the tin and opened it with a flourish, cutting generous slices of fruitcake and placing them before each person. "Eat," she commanded. "Talk on an empty stomach is always too sharp. Eat, and then you will hear each other better." The father looked as though he might protest, but the smell of rich fruit and spice softened even his stern resolve. He took a slice, as did his wife, and soon the room felt less like a courtroom and more like a kitchen table. Between bites, the conversation began again, gentler now. The mother spoke softly, her eyes on her daughter. "You should have told us, Thato. We did not know you felt this way." "You would not have listened," said Thato, her voice trembling. "Perhaps we did not listen enough," admitted her mother. Her father, chewing thoughtfully, remained silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed. "You are my daughter. I have wanted only what is best for you, but perhaps I have been too strict. If you are unhappy, then I must hear it. But you must also remember, family is not to be cast aside. You cannot run from it." Tears welled in Thato's eyes. She nodded. "I know, Rura. I am sorry." The tension in the room began to loosen, like a rope slowly untied. By the time the last crumbs of cake were gone, there was the beginning of understanding. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. When the family finally left, their steps were slower, their voices quieter. Thato glanced back once at Emma Ramotswe, her eyes full of gratitude. In the quiet that followed, Emma Makutsi closed her notebook with satisfaction. "Well," she declared, "that is one case solved. Not in the way I expected, but solved nonetheless." "Not solved," corrected Emma Ramotswe gently. "Mended. Families cannot be solved like puzzles. They can only be mended slowly, with kindness." Emma Potokwane smiled, wiping her hands. "And with cake," she added. Everyone laughed, even Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, who rarely laughed loudly, but who allowed himself a chuckle on this occasion. The office felt lighter, as if the storm had passed. The red chairs stood empty now, waiting for the next story that would enter through the door. But for today, there was the satisfaction of knowing that one family had taken a step back toward one another, guided not by anger, but by truth, patience, and the gentle persuasion of Botswana's first lady detective. At Clockweng Road, Speedy Motors, life went on with its usual mixture of clatter and confusion. The apprentices, having been scolded more than once for losing nuts and bolts, had finally managed to repair the troublesome car that had sat in the yard for days. It was a victory they announced with great pride, parading the engine's steady purr as if it were proof of their genius. "See, Matakoni," said one, wiping his oily hands on his overalls. "We told you we could do it." Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni raised an eyebrow, but smiled indulgently. "Yes, you did it, but only after breaking it twice first. Still, perhaps you are learning." The boys grinned at one another. Small triumphs mattered, even if they came slowly. Back at the detective agency, Emma Grace Makutsi had at last admitted, somewhat grudgingly, that her shoes, though fine, were not the source of her authority. "It is the 97%, she said, tapping her chest with pride. "That will always speak louder than shoes. But still, good shoes are not a bad thing." Emma Ramotswe laughed softly. "Shoes or no shoes, Mama, people respect you for your hard work. That is what they see." Later that afternoon, Mama Potokwane visited again, her arms laden not only with another tin of fruitcake, but also with papers for a small donation she had managed to secure for the orphan farm. "Every pula helps," she said firmly, "and it is never the money itself, it is the kindness behind it that builds the farm." The three women sat together over tea and cake, the apprentices' voices drifting in from the garage, where they still argued cheerfully about football. It was a moment of ease, of small satisfactions woven together. A car repaired, a pair of shoes reassessed, a donation secured. In such moments, Botswana itself seemed to breathe with them. The land was wide, the sky forgiving, and laughter, gentle, shared laughter, was the truest sign that all was well. Evening drew its veil slowly over Zebra Drive, softening the edges of houses and trees until the world seemed wrapped in a shawl of gold and purple. On her veranda, Emma Precious Ramotswe poured the last cup of bush tea for herself and for Emma Grace Makutsi, who had stayed on after the day's work. The kettle hissed gently, and the fragrance of the tea mingled with the cooling air. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the cattle being led home in the distance, their bells ringing softly like memories of old wisdom. The case of the girl, Thato, not Naledi, was behind them now, leaving lessons about truth, belonging, and the quiet strength it takes to be honest. Families, thought Mama Ramotswe, were sometimes as difficult as stubborn cattle, but they could be brought together again with patience and kindness. "Botswana is a good place," she said at last. "Yes," agreed Emma Makutsi, her shoes resting quietly at her side. "A very good place." The sun slipped away, the stars gathered above, and the two women sipped their tea, content. Tomorrow would bring new stories, but tonight all was well.